today's session. That is Dr. Abhishek Das. He's logged in. I'm not sure whether I've gotten the pronunciation right. Was that good?
Yeah, it was perfect. Abhishek Das. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Dr. Abhishek is currently working as a postdoctoral researcher at the Max Planck Institute for Software Systems in Germany. It's early in the morning there. I think it's about 8:15 right now. And so thank you, sir, for giving us your time. His research focuses on AI governance, algorithmic auditing, fairness in digital marketplaces, and AI systems. He specializes in platform compliance with data protection regulations. And so his topic on which he's going to be talking to us is on the GDPR. I know Professor Animesh briefly spoke about that, and rights of data subjects, with a special focus on AI research in mental health care. So he will also be presenting some of his recent work on detecting addictive behaviors using metadata collected by platforms. So I'm sure, I think this would be very relevant and very interesting for all of us. So over to you, Dr. Abhishek.
Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just give me 1 second. Okay, let's go. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. And my name is Abhishek. I'm a postdoc at Max Planck Institute for Software Systems, and I will today be presenting about the General Data Protection Regulation, that is GDPR, and the different rights of data subjects. And I have intentionally kept it like it's a difficult job being a computer scientist to talk about some regulations, and to some people who are in medicine, computer science, and so it's a tough job in hand. But I will try my best to make it interesting for all of you. So the plan for today, or the roadmap for the next 40 minutes or so, would be that we will start with the fundamentals, like why do we even need data protection laws? Then we'll briefly look into the key regulations such as GDPR or India's own DPDP Act. And from there, we will dive into the rights of users, which I believe are the most powerful parts of these laws. And instead of just looking into the rights of data, the rights of users, we'll also sort of take a look at how these things are being implemented right now, and how you can actually do some research for understanding platform addiction just by going over these digital traces as well. And finally, we'll look into the work, the road ahead, and what this all means for us as practitioners and researchers. So let's start with the big question. Why are we even discussing or having this conversation in this forum, and why do we need these complex laws in the first place? So to answer that, let's do a quick poll. Please raise your hand if you use absolutely none of the service that you see on the screen right now. And I will pause for a minute, let the organizers just answer back what is happening in the room, like how many people are raising their hand online and offline.
We have just one raised hand.
Oh, great. So at least we have one. But
Hi,
as expected, yes.
Tezpur,
Hello.
here among the our lived experience expert panel, at least 2 are there who doesn't use all these things.
Okay, great. This is even better to know. But still, what I would just like to point is that pretty much all of us are having some digital presence through some of these social media platforms, and if not, there are some ways involuntarily also we are in social or we are having digital presence. For example, if we go to a hospital and let's say our things got entered into some hospital database or something, then also we inevitably have some digital presence. So we don't just use the internet as a society, we live a part of our lives in these digital spaces. And every interaction with with this digital environment generates data. And it's not just abstract data, it's sometimes very deeply personal as well. For example, when we are writing our emails, we basically mention our names. Our private thoughts in social media posts, we also put them on the digital forum. Our real-time location data when we are navigating on Google Maps gets shared online as well. And even our financial details, for example, when you are purchasing some products online, is getting also shared online as well. So when this much of personal data is being collected, processed, and stored by different organizations and digital forums, we need rules and we need regulations for four key reasons, to the best of my understanding. Like, first is to protect our fundamental human rights in a digital environment, which essentially means that we need to protect our privacy, our dignity, and our freedom to be ourselves without constant surveillance. Second, to rectify massive power imbalance where none of us could negotiate terms with some of the platforms, or as a user, we really don't have any idea of how our data is being stored, processed, and all these things. But these laws create some non-negotiable grounds whereby you could actually access your information as well. And third, to prevent some real-world harms and risks to come in, which is not just theoretical, like unchecked data use can lead to financial fraud, discriminatory decisions in hiring or lending, and even manipulation of our beliefs as well. I'm sure Animesh must have shed some light on some of these issues in his talk as well. And finally, this is a key for innovation, that is to build a trustworthy digital environment where people will essentially people will embrace the technology and will be comfortable in in sharing their information, especially sensitive areas like healthcare, if they trust that their data will be safe. So good privacy is good for business and good for research as well. Now, recognizing these needs, countries all over the world have created their own frameworks of data protection laws. The most influential one, of course, is the GDPR in the European Union, which kickstarted all these things. But we also have laws in California, Brazil, South Africa, and most importantly for us in this room, we have India's own Digital Personal Data Protection Act as well. In fact, it has been signed by the President of India in 2023. So, I think after within a few months or years, it would be in force as well. Now, for today's talk, we will be focusing primarily on GDPR as the global benchmark and look at how DPDP Act compares with it in some nuanced aspects of the regulation, and then we take it away from there with the rights of users and how we could use it for some research purposes as well. Now, so let's quickly get on the same page with some of the key definitions, stakeholders, and principles that underpin both of these laws, like both GDPR and DPDP. So some important definitions that GDPR has, there are essentially a lot of definitions which the regulation draft has, but I have just selected three which would be of interest to a lot of the people in this forum, as well as which will set the stage for the things that I would speak about in the future, which are like, there are three terms. One is personal data, which is any information that can be linked back to a person. For example, a person's name, their identification number, location, So these could be some basically personally identifiable information like PII, traditionally, which we call as PII. Then GDPR also defines something as a spatial category personal data, which is highly sensitive information regarding the health, genetics, even political and religious beliefs of people. And it's, as per GDPR, that is given an extra layer of legal protection as well. And then finally, what do they mean by processing? So processing means any operation or set of operation which is performed on personal data. It could be as simple as just collecting some data, or it could be more nuanced, like where you are doing some inferences on this data, or if you are sharing this data or disseminating this data in other forum as well. And there are three key players in these data protection acts. So in this slide, what you are seeing in red are the terminologies from GDPR, and what you are seeing in blue are the terminologies from the DPDP Act. And so in GDPR terms, you have data controllers. Data controllers are the one who decide why and how the personal data of a person would be processed. So think of a hospital deciding to collect patient data for treatment. And so in this case, the hospital itself, because it sets the purpose of the data collection and processing, it is essentially the controller that is in this setting. And the Indian DPDP Act basically calls the same entity to be data fiduciary. And then the data processor. Data processor is who processes the data on behalf of the controller. For example, if a hospital is trying to store some data about users, it's not going to store it like it could always store it offline, but at the same time it could, like, because of the digital age now, it could be stored online as well. And for the online services, they could take help from some other service providers, some cloud service providers. So those service providers are essentially the processors of the data, who are processing the data on behalf of the controller, that is the hospital in this running example. And then finally, data subject or data principal is an identifiable natural person or any user of the particular system who is interacting with the data controller. And some important common principles that underpins both the regulations, both GDPR and DPDP. These laws are built on like these very minute principles, whereby they basically say that the controller must process personal data legally, fairly, and in an open and clear manner. And all the data that is being processed need to be collected with explicit consent of the user. And the controller should collect minimum personal data that is necessary to serve their purposes without so there is a purpose limitation whereby you should only stick to the purpose that you are trying to serve, as well as for serving that purposes, whatever minimum amount of data is needed, that is the thing which needs to be stored or processed. Otherwise, you cannot just generally collect all the data and then think of what could well be done in future. Similarly, when you are storing data about some naturally identifiable persons, you need to also ensure that they are accurate and up-to-date information, and they are stored in a secured environment which prohibits unauthorized access. So there should be very stringent access control so that these data does not get leaked easily. And finally, the controller is ultimately responsible for complying with all these principles and the safety and security of this data, because this is the trust that the user or the data subjects are basically bestowing on the controller or us when we are processing some of these personal data. Now, with these basic principles of the mark, so the reason, one must be wondering right now, like, okay, why do we also need to understand these things beyond the regular right of access sort of things? The reason why I told, or I thought to include these things in the slides is basically because we all are researchers and we all are like collecting some sort of data or planning to collect some sort of data. Now, in such cases, there are some obligations or some good practices that we as practitioners can also have. For example, we also need to provide the users with some meaningful consent forms, which doesn't look like the consent form of Facebook or anything where there is a tons of information, but then it's not comprehensible for the user. And similarly, we need to take care of what data are we collecting, whether it is serving our purposes or not, and how accurate and how are we going to ensure the confidentiality and integrity of these data as well. So this is predominantly a thing which I would like all practitioners essentially to think through when they're handling their data of such sensitive nature. Now, moving the needle to the GDPR right of data subjects. Again, like these rights, whatever I will be reading right now would all be also available in the DPDP Act of India, but with certain changes, but certain minute changes. But for the sake of just the cohesion of this talk, I would just stick to the right of data subjects as defined by GDPR. And like most of these provisions are similar similar in heart in the Indian Act as well. So GDPR provides a powerful set of rights, including the right of access, whereby a user can get access to a copy of all the personal data that is being processed by any controller on them. They have the right to rectification, whereby if they find that there is some inaccuracy in the data, they should be able to, the controller will have to, with any undue delay, rectify such data. They have the right to erasure, or which is popularly known as the right to be forgotten, where if I don't want my data to be there in some database, then the controller has to comply with this by deleting all the records that they have on me. Similarly, right to restriction of processing. For example, like this is essentially where, like, let's say I have purchased some items or on a digital marketplace, and I do not want some of these purchases to affect my future recommendations. Then I have the right to essentially say them, look, these are not the information that you need to process for me about my future processing. Or even for an example which will probably be more tangible for everyone to think about is when you change your address, for example. So you would also not want Amazon or Flipkart to deliver some product to your older address, right? So it has to be the accurate address. So you need the processing to be done with the updated information about you. Similarly, right to portability. So whereby a user can actually get the export of the personal data from one of the platforms, and if they are not satisfied with the platform, or they're not satisfied with this particular controller, then they could basically export their data and send it to some other controller as well. For example, like a use case could be that, let's say I'm enrolled for some diagnosis in a particular hospital, but I do not at some point I do not think that my diagnosis is going the correct way, or I'm not satisfied or something. Then I could probably also then take the data or take the medical records that they have about me, and then I could plug it into some other medical other hospital records as well. So I am basically shifting the data that I had with one of the controllers to another controller. And then right to object, which is where the user also has the right to object of processing of personal data by controller from a time onwards. And for today, we are going to focus on one of the rights which is incredibly powerful, because if the right of access is implemented properly, then all the subsequent rights will essentially be benefited. For example, if the right of access is not done properly, then I do not know what data somebody has about me. So I do not have any means to rectify or to erase or even to port or to object to some sort of personal data processing. So that's why I said that right of access is incredibly powerful, and that is the thing which we are going to focus for the remainder of the talk. Now, GDPR right of access is essentially provided in the Article 15 of GDPR, which states that the user have a right to get a full copy of their personal data and detailed information about how it is being processed, who has seen this data, why was it collected, and for how long will it be stored, what are the purposes of this data collection. So you can get all these details just by requesting a copy of your personal data as per law to the platform or to any controller that processes your data. Now, this is not just a legal theory, but platforms are actually building tools to comply with this, where they operationalize this right of access by providing what we call data download packages, or DDPs, and here you are basically seeing the step-by-step process on TikTok. Then you could basically navigate through these steps from the homepage to request your entire data history that TikTok has about you. And these services are available on any sorts of online platforms which are globally and especially operational in the European Union. For example, you can today, right now, you could go to your Facebook or Instagram and request a copy of your personal data, even sitting in India, which is popularly known as the Brussels effect, where, like, since GDPR brought this in, now all the platforms are providing these services across the board. Even you could go do this thing on YouTube, ChatGPT, or any of the online platforms that we were seeing in the first slide. Now, so what's actually stored in these data packages? And the answer is a lot more than what you would even expect. It includes your activities on that said platform, your device and network information, your content, and even your preferences that the algorithmic system of these platforms have inferred about you. And perhaps most surprising for the people in the room, it often also includes your activities off the platform as well. For example, just a bit of a jargon things which I will just say here is that whenever we go to any of these online platforms also track us. And the basic business model of many of these online platforms is through advertising. So, for example, if I am hosting a website, I could basically, if I'm hosting a website or a service and I want to advertise my thing on TikTok or Instagram or Google, then what I usually will do is I will store some of their tracking mechanisms in the back end of my website, so that whenever someone is coming to my website, my website is basically processing this data. Okay, this person or this particular user has come to this particular website, and he or she is doing this sort of a thing. Maybe is purchasing something, or just they saw the page and then went away, and these sorts of activities often get recorded, and then they get shared with the platform on like whose tracking tools are installed on my website as well. So even those sorts of things are stored in these DDPs. And next, I will basically show you some examples to make it even more realistic of what you could expect in these DDPs. So, for example, if let's take a look at the like some examples from the TikTok data download packages. So the first thing that they share is an activity summary, where they basically show you, okay, one thing before we proceed, they all share it in machine readable format, which would be some JSON files like the ones which you are seeing on the screenshot. Unfortunately, like, this is the way that they share, and this is the way I'm presenting it. There is no better presentation of this right now, barring the ones which Animesh and I are working with some of our collaborators, which would be available soon online as well. But going back to these DDPs, so TikTok essentially gives you your activity summary map, like how many videos you have commented since you registered, or how many videos you have shared since your account registered, or how many videos you watched till the end since you registered. It also provides you with your login history, which includes information like the date that you logged in, the IP address. Now notice the personal data, like with your IP address, someone could essentially identify from where you are from where you are signing in and who you are. Then they also store things like your device model, which device operating system you are using, what network types you are using to connect to these platforms, and even which service provider, like are you using O2DE as it shows for me, or are you using your Reliance Geo or Airtel. Every information would be stored in these DDPs. Not only that, whatever is your activities on the platform, like on TikTok, essentially you could follow other users, and other users could also follow you. For example, I was following these different accounts, and so it's storing when did I start following these accounts on TikTok. It could also store your search history. For example, what information are you looking for in these platforms? And here, like, since this is a dummy account which I had created, I was basically searching for my current advisor, Krishna Gumadi, on TikTok, and that's the entry which has been recorded over here. Similarly, on TikTok or on Facebook or on any of the social media platforms, you also have these like or favorite buttons, like where you could like a particular content that you like. And again, what content did you like, a URL to that content, and when did you like it is also recorded in these DDPs. And finally, share history. Like, all of us basically share some of these things online. Like you retweet some tweets by other colleagues, or you share some LinkedIn post that your colleague have shared, or you share some TikTok videos or Instagram posts on the platforms. And those things, like what is the what on what date it is shared, what is the shared content, and the link to that particular content, and even how did you share it. Like, you could share it online on TikTok, you could share it, or you could just copy the link and share it on WhatsApp or something. So those methods, like, so they collect details to that granularity of what you are sharing and what you're doing on these platforms. Next is browsing history. Now, it's a complete list of its own, because like these previous ones, there would be records of, like, for example, login history. It's not like this is the only login. There would be multiple of these. I have just created one snapshot so that you could just take a look at what all information is actually dumped in these data download packages. Now, in a similar vein, now I'm showing you browsing history. And the reason why I'm giving here a list of this browsing history is because on TikTok or Instagram or many of these platforms, what happens is that it's a continuous stream of content. So you have to just scroll up and up and up to see the next content. Now, in this particular case on TikTok, what they provide you is the date or the time when you actually saw this particular post, and what particular post that you basically saw. So in a sense, you could basically now infer, if you have the metadata of these videos, then you could infer how much time does a user spend on each of these videos as well, and how frequently do they come back to TikTok or any other social media platforms. And then, as I was talking about this off-platform activity, this is a snippet from one of my earlier Instagram data that I had shared, that I had requested. So there is a service provider, which is yuptv.com, which has basically stored an event of page view about me at this particular timestamp, and has stored a purchase information about me at a particular timestamp. Now, let me just uh, like translate these numbers to some more interpretable facts. For example, this timestamp which you see at the bottom is essentially Sunday's October 8th, 2023. And it says that I had purchased something. So does anyone know what was happening on Sunday, October 8th, 2023? Does anyone recall? It's something which many Indians actually follow very religiously.
Cricket or
World Cup or something. Dhanteras. We have suggestions about sports here.
I heard the term cricket, and I also heard the term World Cup. Kudos. So essentially, it was the day when India-Australia match was happening. So it was one of India's earlier matches in the Cricket World Cup. And I basically bought a subscription on Yup TV, which is the official service provider in Germany, to watch the match. So now you see that I purchased something on October 8th, 2023, and that instance, I mean, I have basically withheld the time information, but with the time information is recorded as it is. Like it's like whatever tasks you have done online is recorded to the T, as with pretty much a lot of precision. So we have this incredibly rich and detailed data. Now, what can we do with it? How can we use this right of access for doing responsible research? And this brings me to a case study from one of our earlier works where we used these very data packages to study platform addiction on TikTok. So this work was recently published at ICWSM, which is a flagship conference in computer science and social media. And in this work, we defined behavioral addiction as like following the norms which are being provided in Digital Services Act of European Union, that behavioral addiction is a compulsion to engage with content despite knowing its harmful effects. And our central question is, can we see signs of addiction with this platform in the digital traces, in the user data download packages? So to do this research, we used an interdisciplinary approach where we collected two types of data from our survey participants. So in this survey, we essentially collected data from 1,500 people, but at the end of the day, we could only gather data from 107 people. So so this is one of the current drawbacks of these data donation based studies, where you could hire a very representative sample, but then in the end of the day, because this if you recall, when I was showing, maybe I could just do a quick jump to an earlier slide. So if you see, you have to go through 9 steps to just request the data. Then you have to download it, and then you have to share it with researchers. So sometimes these sorts of things could actually be off-putting for some of the participants as well. So which essentially happened in our study as well. So eventually we were able to collect data from 107 participants, and we analyzed their thing. And so essentially to do this study, we used an interdisciplinary approach, and we collected 2 types of data from our survey participants. First, we used a validated psychological tool, which is the Bergen Facebook Addiction Scale, to measure their subjective self-reported addiction level. And this Bergen scale is essentially, it gives us dimension of addiction like salience on tolerance, salience tolerance, mood modification, relapse. So when someone is trying to cut down on their social media usage are they able to successfully do that, or are they failing to do that? So they basically self-report these answers in a Likert scale from 1 to 5, and based on their scores they will be then categorized into they're likely addicted, or moderately likely addicted, or less likely addicted. And to back it up, we had them use their GDPR right of access to download their TikTok data, which basically gives us an objective know-how of how they in real world used TikTok during that just the period prior to that particular study. And based on their survey scores, we essentially grouped these participants into high, moderate, and less likely addicted groups. And the two questions which we were essentially looking at is that, given that we have this addiction level inferred using some of these prior studies like this Bergen Facebook addiction scale, can we now infer what are the differences in the patterns of usage from this self-reported scores, or from this self-reported responses? And what we found was a clear correlation that the objective data, the digital data traces, essentially showed that the participants in different addiction groups had measurably different usage pattern. For example, the group which was highly likely addicted were actually viewing, like having more viewing time. They had more frequent, they return back to TikTok more frequently, and even they have more nighttime usage as well. And then we tried to flip this particular question. Okay, so from the addiction level, you could essentially see that there are some differences in how they are using the social media platforms. But from these usage on social media platforms, can you now infer the addiction level or not? So essentially the task is now just the reverse of what we saw in the earlier stage. But when the question is flipped, that is, if addiction levels so what we did is we fed the engagement features from data download packages like viewing time, frequency of return, etc., into a machine learning model, and we found that just from these very crude, like viewing time, return frequency, and some of these very observable information from the digital traces, we could identify addicted users with a pretty good F1 score of about 0.7 or 70%. So this shows that digital traces can indeed act as a proxy for proxy to sort of identify these addiction levels. At the same point, I would also like all of us to see this slide with a grain of salt, that 0.7 is nothing to boast about. Like, it's just a study which we are doing, and we essentially found that, okay, with 70% F1 score, you could identify people who are highly likely addicted. But then there are, of course, some misclassifications as well. And here, if you misclassify someone who is not likely addicted, but you classify them as likely addicted, then that would be an undue stress for the user, for such a user, if there is some future intervention that is to be done. But on the other hand, if you misclassify someone who is likely addicted to be not likely addicted, then that would lead to the person actually getting more and more sucked into the social media platforms as well. Now, so with all these discussions about the regulations, about how you can actually use this thing to identify like potential social media addiction as well, let's bring this all together and look at the road ahead that we have. So the key message that I want all of us to take away from this talk is that interdisciplinary research is essential and is the need of the hour, because more and more sensitive health information is being shared online. And with the growing popularity of conversational systems like ChatGPT or Gemini and these sorts of models, these threats are even more alarming. In a study which Animesh and I are both conducting, we are seeing that a lot of people are actually looking for solutions to their health issues, to their mental health issues from ChatGPT, because that is as per them, that is an advisor that is available 24/7, and that is an advisor which will not judge them immediately. So many people are going to these platforms voluntarily to ask about different issues. Now, computer scientists like Animesh and myself, we need the help of doctors and practitioners to actually understand the risks given these contexts. And doctors may also need the help of computer scientists to responsibly use these sophisticated methods to analyze these data and also process the personal data and also adhere to the legal principles that I was mentioning earlier. Now, so to summarize, here are the 4 key takeaways that I would like you to live with today. The first is, most importantly, as practitioners, we must uphold the right of data subjects. These rights are our ethical and legal obligation as we conduct research and provide care. Second, digital traces reveal granular behavioral patterns that can provide an objective complement to some of the traditional clinical assessments as well. And third, this data can empower responsible mental health research, especially in identifying at-risk participants in a consent-driven and ethical manner. And finally, as I was mentioning in the last slide, the future is interdisciplinary. It requires a collaboration between not only medical experts and computer scientists, but also legal experts to navigate this world, this new digital world safely and effectively. With that, I would like to conclude the talk. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abhishek. I think it was a very well delivered talk. We were able to get a lot of very key points, both in terms of one, obviously being able to understand data protection and how important data protection is in the context of the world that we live in right now, but also equally about being able to empower the general public about knowing their rights related to the data that they share. And I think that's extremely important for, all of us, and specifically in the context of the medical field. Although it is a bit scary to know the extent to which our digital presence is tracked. I know that we know about all of this to a certain extent, but having it laid out in black and white is a bit scary as well. So are there any questions?
Yeah, there's from your last one.
Yeah.
So one of the questions from the attendees is, does it help to be incognito? Do these various services capture as much about us when we are in incognito mode in, say, any browser?
The unfortunate answer is no, it doesn't help. Because eventually these platforms are like the DDPs that you get are essentially platform agnostic. Like if you are connecting through any incognito system, if you are connecting through any any other device, everything will be stored in this DDP, because essentially once you sign in, because many of these platforms, if you notice, are where you have to sign in to use the service. It's not like you could go to Instagram and just browse, right? So in that sense, the moment you sign in, there you go. Incognito is off.
Can I
Please go ahead.
quickly, since we were talking about DPDP, as far as I know, except for EU and some states in the US, we really do not have proper laws, as it's still an evolving area. Just quickly, have you gone through the proposed DIA, Digital India Act?
Unfortunately, no. I would like to confess that I am a computer scientist and not a lawyer, so I haven't been through many of these.
Since you're doing an interdisciplinary thing, I was just wondering, because I see a lot of gaps there, so I was just wondering whether you are working with... it would be useful for you to look at it.
Yes, definitely. In fact, I would actually like to thank the organizers actually, when I was doing we were going over these interactions, they basically forced me that, okay, can you look into DPDP? Because I was not aware that DPDP is something which is already enforced or already it has been signed up by the President of India, and which actually was a very nice exercise for me over this week, that I was basically having on one hand GDPR and the other DPDP Act, and to just see how do they match, or what are the merits and demerits of these things. And I have a bunch of observations on that which I didn't essentially share in this in this slide deck. One of the key things which I noticed, which scares me a bit, is that I think Indian DPDP Act is allowing laziness, in the sense that GDPR asks the platforms to share a copy of the personal data. So by law, platforms are required to share a lot of information just beyond the copy of the data. And one of the studies which Animesh and I are doing right now, which is saying that they are not adhering to that right now. So we are sort of we are trying to get in touch with the data protection authorities in European Union to see what can be done. Now you need to take this study and go after them. Like, you need to now comply with these things. But on the other hand, where I was saying that the DPDP Act is actually making these things lazy, is that GDPR asks for a copy of your personal data, whereas if you go and take a look at DPDP, it asks for a summary of all the data that is being processed. Now, the moment you say summary of all the data, then the agency, you are basically taking the agency away. Like, it's a right of users, but you are taking the right of user away and giving it more to the controller. Now it's on to you how you want to implement a summary of the personal data. And if you understand, like, when it's a summary, that means you don't know what all data is being gathered about you, and then which effectively prohibits you to exercise your right to object, right to erase, right to rectify, right to all the other subsequent rights, essentially. So, which is a bit alarming for me as a computer scientist, because with the GDPR, with all the strict provisions, if they are not complying, now if you are allowing laziness to them, right now, sitting in India as well, we could get a copy of our personal data. But what if tomorrow they actually say, no, now Indians don't need a copy of their personal data, they just need a summary of their personal data. So I'll just give them a summary, and summary could be anything. Like, summary could be the vague privacy pages that they have, where you go see a lot of information being there, but actually there is no information.
Just to add on to that, see, the problem is not just DPDP, even the DIA. Both of this, more than laziness, I think it is bad omission, in the sense that it's like, the Right to Information Act. They'll say the government can give you what they want, not the information you see. So it's the controller can give you what they want, not what you're seeking. So DIA also carries it forward. So, like you said, the control over the information is not with the user. Now, unfortunately, in India, what happens is you can't, enforce anything that European law allows it, cannot be enforced in India. Now, the problem, you know what the problem with that would be, in which case they can run away with the data, and given how these companies, whether it's Meta or any of these companies, the history that they have had in terms of dealing with personal data, even as a lawyer, for me, it's very scary.
Yes.
Where it would.
Yes.
And
yes.
For mental health, it will be even worse.
And like, just one additional point, that DPDP does not have any designation of spatial category data. Like, they just have personal data. So they do not even unlike GDPR, which actually says that you have to take care of personal data with utmost care, but for sensitive personal data, it has to be even more rigorous. For the Indian version, the DPDP Act, that distinction is also missing right now. So maybe there is a lot of deliberation to be done in just amending some of the provisions that they already
No,
have.
that is why you need to be involved in the DIA process, because that's equally lazy. So unless people like you start giving your inputs, it's going to be lazy. So
Thank you. So I think it's a very important discussion. I mean, in terms of how some of these regulations are actually formulated, because yeah, I mean, it's all in the devil is in the detail, right? Ultimately, and I think Nishant, you had a question as well.
Dr. Abhishek, am I audible?
I think
Yes, yes.
It's okay. If I am audible, it is okay. Dr. Abhishek, it was a wonderful presentation, and I think it scared me a lot, first of all, and that this is what happening. I just wanted to check with you, like you mentioned about, okay, the information they provide is who has completed or seeing a video, who has completed a video, or who has checked this video. That kind of information is can be obtained from that. But is it possible to obtain exactly what the content of the video is?
Yes. So as I mentioned that they have the URLs of the video. So essentially in the data download package itself, they don't provide you with the content, but they provide you with a pointer to the content. So you could then essentially go and collect all this data. And then if you so wish, you could also process this data as well. Like if you have enough compute resources, you could even analyze these videos, or if you have limited resources, all these videos also come with some metadata. For example, what is the category that TikTok assigned to this video, or what is the duration of this video, and what are all the other what is the description that the author provided with this video. So you could also utilize these things as well in your analysis as well.
Aishwarya, go ahead.
Hi, sir. Thank you so much for your presentation. I learned a lot. Sir, because we work in research and a lot of our work is on psychiatric narratives, so I had a few questions on that. Sometimes we train our clinical AI systems on multinational data sets. So how do we kind of harmonize patient consent and data protection laws across countries? How do we do that? Was one of my questions.
Okay. I mean, first of all, I think there are some standard things which you have to do. For example, first you have to check whether the users who are sending these data from other countries, first and foremost, they should be explicitly signing a consent form that, okay, like they are taking this data, or I'm transferring this data with my full knowledge. So this explicit consent is very necessary, because that essentially forms the lawfulness principle that I was mentioning. And then once this data, once you are getting this data, so the way you would like to transmit this data, or let's say, for example, some of the ways which we do when people are giving us this data is that we usually create a software system which would first show the user that, okay, these are the data that you are going to share with the researchers. Are you okay with this? And then they have to give another consent. Yes, now send this. And once they click on the send, so all this data is then basically encrypted and shared, directly transferred to the secure server that MPI, SWS, or IIT Kharagpur has. And once the data reaches there, then they are like the access controls that we put on those data is very restrictive. Like, for example, the project which I was talking about, the data is accessible. Not even Animesh can access that data. Let me just say it in this way. So Animesh is my PhD advisor, but since he's not involved in that project, he's not able to access this data unless he gets the access. And also, I think another practice which is missing currently in India, at least in many of the technical universities, is the ethics review board. Like, for example, where you could actually, not only GDPR, but also there is another provision called Digital Services Act, which actually puts forward a bunch of details, or bunch of prescriptions through which a researchers could be vetted, meaning there should be some ethics review board or some committee which would basically vouch that, okay, this researcher or this research group has the desired abilities to handle this personal data with utmost integrity and confidentiality, and they would not let it leak and these sorts of things as well. So maybe having ethics review board or some committee which would vouch for these sorts of processes would also be helpful. So in our institute, we usually, before any sorts of data collection drives or any sorts of studies where humans are involved, we usually go for a detailed study procedure that this is what we want to do. If it is okay with the ethics review board, we will go ahead with it. If it is not, then we'll have to modify the study procedure and then go ahead with the thing.
Yeah, actually, that was my second question, sir, because we do have a IEC. I mean, we have an ethics committee and institution review board, but AI and psychiatry, especially psychiatry, because one could argue that even if PII is removed, that the narrative can, risk re-identification. So how do we kind of protect against that? So probably we need an added layer when there's research in AI is what I was going to ask you. So yeah. Thank you.
There is a subtlety in that question as well. So the answer is that you cannot anonymize any data that you get from any of these platforms. You cannot fully anonymize them. So the term which GDPR uses is pseudonymize, meaning you make it difficult for the re-identification to happen. But ultimately, we all have to take it with a pinch of salt that this risk always exists over there. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
I had one question, Dr. Abhishek, before you go. And I am that organizer who pushed you into reading DPDP.
Oh, great.
Can't share. This principle of, take minimal amount of data based on your purpose. I'm coming to you as a researcher, is in exact opposition to how we look at research, especially in genetics. Because we as yet do not know what the extent of possibilities are. These are still fields which are in hypothesis generating area, and Jayant would agree with me. What does one do in that case? How does one phrase a consent form? Because I would truly like to collect as many samples as I can, preserve them for as long as I can. It's very likely that I would come up with new uses for this data as the technology improves. So how does one handle that kind of situation?
So one of the things which could be implemented would be repeated consents. For example, if you have collected data from a set of users and they have given you the consent that, okay, go ahead and use my genetics data or any other data for some of these purposes, one of the things which you could always repeatedly do, because it's a one-time data collection, but it gets stored with you forever, essentially going after. Then maybe periodically you need to sort of ask the users, are they still like consent is an interesting phenomenon. We always think that consent is that I give you consent to use my data. But there is another aspect of consent. I give you now consent to, I revoke my consent now, so that you don't use my data anymore. So maybe for that, we need to periodically go back to these people if they want to revoke or if they want to continue with it. And also maybe the incentive structure for the people who are giving this data, maybe instead of a one-time payment or one-time remuneration, you could also put in some periodic remunerations, whereby that would also motivate others also to come and join your study programs as well.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, just relevant to this last point, actually nowadays most consent forms, at least in genetics, usually what they include One is the issue of pseudonymization, that they do say that you can go back to the person from the genetic data, although it's hard to do it, but it is possible. So you can only talk about pseudonymization and not total anonymization. And this specific aspect that you're talking about, that you will have the option in future to be able to revoke consent, is in most international consent forms is actually included in genetic studies as well. And the issue of reconsent, if you need to use it for a future application, is also built in. So I think it's pretty much on point.
But I mean, one exception is, I mean, I don't know if Abhishek will have an answer for this. What if that data has already become part of a model's weights? This is a large neural network, and this is now the part of this model's weights. How do you clip it now? How can that be? Can truly be the right be exercised?
Revocation right.
Honestly, that is the question which all computer scientists are grappling over right now, like, which is sort of this nuanced concepts of machine unlearning and these sorts of things, where, because once it is part of the parametric knowledge of a model, how do you remove it? Or do you then have to start everything from scratch, which is not really a plausible solution? And there, I think, although I'm not very conversant with the machine unlearning literature, but there could be some tricks and checks which people could do if you are using federated learning, for example. Like, for example, if you have some local models which are trained on a smaller subset of this thing, which then aggregate into a larger decision-making machine, then maybe you could just unplug the smaller thing and retrain it again. So thereby it would incur less cost even for the retraining part as well. So maybe that is one of the approaches which one could do, which is through federated learning, or or else we probably need some more time as a community from computer science to also come, to basically propose some methodology with guarantee that it happens.
Thank you.
And I think
So these days, like, just to follow up, so these days what people do is, as he was suggesting, people do local learning. So basically you learn from each individual user's data at his or her server itself. And then you have a means to integrate it. Okay, the moment the user declines or revokes, you can, you can cut off that. So there is a way to, so the machine unlearning is one way, but that is in general expensive, compute expensive. This is so basically one is a top-down approach and the other is a bottom-up approach.
Thank you so much, Professor Animesh, Dr. Abhishek. I think this talks to the right to forget as such, and I think it's not as easy to implement as we would imagine. Thank you. I think it was a very, very engaging and enlightening session, and I think the whole morning has really led up to a very interesting set of talks and things for us to think about. So we will break now.